Guys, thank you for changing the topic with us today. Of course, this is the time where we normally have our weekly 12-month transformation webinar, but I kind of got the feeling that we all had bigger fish to fry. And I think from your comments, you were happy to go with that. And I did say in the Facebook group that I am going to share this session with our audience in some way. I don't know whether it will be a podcast or we'll share this video, of course, without all of your comments on it, because I think that this is just something that's really important for everyone at the moment. Just welcoming everyone into the group. I love that, Anne-Marie. Welcome. Hello, everyone from the land of social distancing. And Fran says, I hope you all sanitized your hands before joining in the group. It's a, Pamela says, hello all, the only approved way to get together. Feeling kind of relieved about all of that. Yeah, it does show the power of this online stuff, that at least we can all connect in this way. And we're definitely doing that with so many of our clients. You know, they might not want to come in. The office is still open at the moment. They might not want to come in, but we can still at least connect and keep the progress going through Skype. So I thought we would just talk today about how we cope with the coronavirus. And I guess this session in a way will be a little bit like therapy. I am, full disclosure, no expert on the coronavirus. So I suppose I'll be doing with you guys what I kind of do with my clients is we just talk and I share some ideas. And of course, not all of those ideas will be perfectly relevant to you. So just take what is useful for you out of today's session. So I want us to have a chat about a few particular strategies that you can do to help if you're maybe having to or choosing to self-isolate, or if you're concerned about the effects that this is going to have on you health-wise or socially or economically, or all of the myriad of other reasons that this can affect us. But before we do that, and of course, I want us to talk about how this relates to our health goals. You know, we're a group of people who have a desire to have a healthier relationship with food and movement and take care of our health. So how does that all sort of tie together in a time like this? I've got my sparkling water here. I need a big one today. It's been a big day for a big time for all of us, really. But before we get into those strategies, I wanted to talk to you about a principle or an idea that I think has been really, really useful for my clients at this time. And that principle is optimism. Now, it might sound a bit funny to talk about optimism at a time like this, and the risk when we talk about optimism in a tough time is that we will not validate the whole spectrum of unpleasant emotions that we're feeling. And so I absolutely want to start with that caveat that we don't want to ignore or try to dismiss our unpleasant emotions. Depending on how this is affecting you, this could be almost or even traumatic for some people. So this can be a huge thing. And so we don't want to discount that. But if we look into optimism, and I'm hoping to give you a little bit of an education on optimism if you don't know too much about it. And I'm really drawing from the work here of a guy named Martin Seligman. So he's probably the world's leading researcher on optimism, and he's written a great book called Learned Optimism, which is a wonderful read. I recommend it to a lot of clients. And also he's written several other books on optimism. So I'm drawing a lot from his work. And one of the things Seligman says is that true optimism is about how we respond when things go bad. And this is, of course, a really bad thing. So he says it's quite easy to be optimistic when things are sailing on the calm waters, when life is really, really good. That's easy for a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot of people. He said true optimism really comes into play when bad things happen. And I want to talk you through the three main elements of optimism versus pessimism and how they might apply to what we're experiencing now. And I really think that reflecting on where you sit with these three elements, these we call them the three P's, may help you take a more optimistic approach through this time. So the first P is personalization. So people who have a more pessimistic type of attitude tend to personalize bad things. Think this is about me. This is bad things always happen to me, and so it becomes a personal thing. I remember a colleague said to me, Glenn, how are you feeling about your book? It's such bad timing having released the book and you've gone through, we've had the bushfires here, of course, in Australia. And then we're going through probably in Australia, really the start of the coronavirus. And it was funny because I wasn't personalizing it at all. I think maybe partly because I'm fairly optimistic and I've also done a lot of work through Martin Seligman's work, and I didn't personalize it all. I'm like, well, this actually isn't about me. This is just something that's happening to, the fires are to everyone in Australia, and the coronavirus is to everyone in the world. So if you are personalizing this and feeling like this is just another bad thing that's happening to you, something else that's getting in the way of life, then I would encourage you to do your best to depersonalize it. And my personal belief, I mean, we're all different, is that may be relatively easy to do with something like the coronavirus because it is just affecting, of course, all of us. So it's absolutely not a personal thing. The next P is permanence. So if you have a more pessimistic thinking style, when bad things happen, you tend to think that that's never going to change. Life is never going to be the same again. This has permanently affected me. Whereas an optimistic way of thinking will be that this is a temporary thing. This is going to come and this is going to go. And I must admit that for me personally, I'm sure we're all responding to this in different ways, but I have over the last couple of days found myself in moments where I have felt like this is going to be permanent. Like, I'm not sure of the direction that we're going to go with our clients and with our work. We may have to sort of shut that down. Also, it may end up being one of the longest times where I don't see my parents physically, because they're a little bit older, and my brother and I don't want to kind of expose ourselves to them at the moment. And you kind of get this feeling like, oh my God, this could last forever. But of course, if we check in with the reality of things, and this is a really important point in optimism, is that the true optimism is grounded in reality. So we're not seeing the world with rose-colored glasses. We're not ignoring the reality. We're just choosing to see that from the most positive and helpful perspective. And we all have seen probably those graphs. Here in Australia, we're trying to flatten the curve, and we see whether it is a spiky curve, like it's been in China, for example, or whether it's hopefully like it's going to be in Australia, a flatter curve. It is a curve nonetheless. So we can remind ourselves that if we look at countries like China, for example, the curve has gone up, and then the amount of new cases is already going down. So while it might be quite terrible, and I know it's changing all of our lives in various ways, it may help for us to remind ourselves that this is a temporary bad situation. The last element of optimism versus pessimism, the third P, is pervasiveness. So if we're pessimistic in our thinking style, when a bad thing happens, we tend to see that as pervading all areas of life. Whereas if we take an optimistic thinking style, the problem that we're experiencing is really confined to that problem. Now, for me personally, I feel like this is a really tough one when it comes to coronavirus because it feels so pervasive. It's in all of our countries, it's in our schools, it's in our hospitals, it's in our workplaces, it's affecting our emotional, social, mental health. So it can feel extremely pervasive, like it's just infiltrating every area of life. But I believe that even that isn't completely true because we have seen here in Australia, for example, today we had some people who feel like they have potentially a cure at the Royal Brisbane Hospital, and they needed $750,000, and then within the space of 24 hours, twice that money was raised. So there is a real goodwill around people, and I feel like there is a sense of, while there is a bit of craziness going on, there is also a sense of empathy and kindness that the coronavirus doesn't have to touch. So that's where I feel for us, there are these areas of, our own personal values and who we want to be and what we want to stand for, and potentially our spirituality and our connection and empathy for others, that this virus doesn't have to pervade. So I think that's something interesting to reflect on, and to think, if you are making this a personal issue, or you are feeling like it's going to last forever and things will never be the same, or if you're feeling like this is just all encompassing, that potentially working on those 3 Ps in some way or another may help quite a bit. Now, one thing that I want to be really clear on is that, like I said, optimism is grounded in reality. True optimism is grounded in the reality of what is going on. So that absolutely doesn't mean that you don't take care of yourself. It doesn't mean that you don't follow the health recommendations, and it doesn't mean that you don't listen to your inner voice and be sensible about taking care of yourself and other people. So it absolutely in no way means that. Martin Seligman talks about a lovely story at the start of Learned Optimism, where he talks about this story of a husband and wife that he was seeing, and they had their at some stage in their child's early development, they realized that the child couldn't hear. And so they took the child to a hearing specialist, and they had to get some more tests done. And the tests sort of showed that they wouldn't actually know more about this until the child got a little bit older and did a couple more tests, and they didn't know whether it was going to be fine or whether there was going to be a problem. And in this situation, the husband was more optimistic and the wife was more pessimistic. And they were going through this waiting game. And I feel like we're all in a big waiting game at the moment. And while they were going through the waiting game, it was really deeply impacting the mother. And the father was worried and concerned and upset, but he was less affected and more able to do those things that he needed to do. And in this situation, the child was fine. Now, there's a couple of important points there, I think. The first one is that both the mother and the father, husband and wife, they both were able to acknowledge that something needed to be done for the testing. They were both proactive in getting further testing done. So it wasn't like the husband, because he was more optimistic, ignored the problem. He still was able to deal with the problem in the same way, but just had less stress associated with it. that example is a good example because some optimism research and one of my favorite of Seligman's studies was he just sat down with people and he asked them, what's the worst thing that's going to happen to you within the next year? And people sort of reported the usual things. They thought, I might lose my job, or someone that I love might die, or all of these, these terrible things. And then he asked them, just 1 year later, he brought them back in and just asked them a very simple question, and that was a yes/no answer. Did the thing that you worried about happen? And in 90% of cases, so 9 out of 10, that terrible thing didn't happen. So I think that's worthwhile us thinking about. And I think we can all think of times in our lives or certain situations where we have thought of the worst case scenarios, but that hasn't actually played out. Now, probably a final thing on optimism before we move on to talking about some actual practical strategies that you might employ at this time. And I think this is a really, really important point, because a lot of us are almost sometimes resistant to being optimistic, or we're fearful of being optimistic because we feel as if pessimism protects us, or we feel another sort of the corollary of that is that we feel like being too optimistic will set us up for failure. But think about what we've been talking about so far. We're talking about how we can take an optimistic approach towards a bad thing happening. So what I'm saying is that taking an optimistic approach will help you better in terms of your mental health. It won't stop you from doing the things you need to do to take care of yourself. In fact, it may help you potentially do them better because you'll be seeing things a bit more clearly and you'll have more mental energy to take charge of those things that you need to do differently, the things you need to do more of or less of or start doing or stop doing, all of those different things to take care of yourself. But say, and of course, none of us can guarantee that a really bad situation won't happen to anyone who's in this webinar or anyone who watches or listens to it afterwards. We absolutely can't guarantee that. But what I can say is that, and I've seen this time and time again with my clients, is that if we develop an optimistic thinking style, that optimistic thinking style then protects you in the case that further bad situations happen. So I feel like I've been talking a lot. Does anyone have any questions or any thoughts on applying optimism or taking an optimistic view towards this pretty terrible and very concerning situation? Anyone have any thoughts? We're making sense? Oh, good. We'll continue then. How we might apply this optimism to what's going on now is that, this is a time where we're being restricted from doing so many things. There are so many things that we can't do. And of course, that varies from person to person, from region to region, from country to country, depending on what you do for a living, depending on your family situation, so many factors. But the list of things that we can't do is growing and growing. So it can be very easy for us to focus on that. Naturally, we will. But if we can then bring the focus back to what we can do, then we are going to do a lot better. So, for example, at the moment, I can go to the gym, but I've decided that because I run the practice from home and people are coming in and out all the time, I think it's too risky for me, so I'm going to give myself a break from the gym for a while. And to be honest, I've been loving the gym. It's been something I've just started up this year, and I've surprised myself with how much I'm enjoying it. But that'll go for a while. And so I found myself this morning thinking, this was a gym time. I really would like to go to the gym, but I can't. And I sort of reframed my thoughts back into, okay, what can I do? And the thing that I could do that made sense was just to go for a walk along the river. I'm not getting as good at exercise. It's not going to get me as strong, which I'm really enjoying, that feeling of being stronger at the gym. But it is something that I can do. And so this is just me talking about myself as an example. But I think it'd be really interesting for you guys to reflect on what you can do. And I'd be interested to hear too, if there's anything that you've done to be able to reframe your thoughts into looking at, well, okay, what can I do here? Even though there's probably a lot that I can't do. I don't know if we can all get here, because for some people this situation is just it's too difficult. It's too big. If we're worried about our health, or we're worried about the health of loved ones and their safety. And so I don't think this is always a doable one. But another element of optimism, and this is one of my favorite quotes on optimism, is that the pessimist sees the problem in every opportunity, whereas the optimist sees the opportunity in every problem. And so I would encourage you, if you feel like you can get there, to see if you can discover, uncover, carve out, or create an opportunity in this problem. For me, for example, I've thought about how I might do this, and I've just started listening to a really interesting audiobook. And I thought to myself, okay, so if we have to shut down the office, one of the things I might do is just take a day to listen to that whole audiobook. Take a day, take 2 days maybe to listen to that audiobook. Now, previously, taking a whole day to read or listen to a book wouldn't have been something I've done in years. So while I may not be doing the usual business things, the things that I like to do, seeing clients, working on our online programs, or doing social media stuff, I really like that stuff. There is an opportunity if I've got a long period of time, and in Australia we're talking about the quarantine period might be 14 days, then there's going to be some opportunities for me to do some different things. I've also got a list of things that, we have those things that are on our to-do list, and I've got a couple of those happening for work. And I think if it comes to the situation where it doesn't work to see clients or something like that, then I can spend a lot of time sinking my teeth into those, and those things that sort of sit in the back of my mind. And I'm sure that we all have those things that sit in the back of our minds, and hopefully some of those things are things we can do when we're at home. So that will be another thought, is to see if you can find the opportunity in this problem. And when I talk this through with clients, they are often surprised that there is some opportunity that can be found. Now, speaking of being at home, how do we deal with just being at home for such a long period of time, often by ourselves? This is a big one that you guys were asking. One thing is obvious, and I think we all go to this first, is, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do for all of that time? So I think we have to think of things to do, and we have to be proactive, and we have to be creative in thinking about things to do. But I think that you probably already know that. I would, and if you were sitting here as my client, I would sit and brainstorm with you things to do. And if you want to share anything in the group now, please comment. What are some things that you have planned to do over this time that I suppose that you may not have normally done because you would be just doing your normal routines of life? Is there anyone that has anything that they've thought, okay, now that I am by myself in isolation, or now that my routines are greatly restricted, is there anything that I've chosen to give myself as a pastime? So I'd love to hear if anyone has those. Please put them in the chat group. For me, another thing that I'm going to do is I've got like Netflix, Stan, Foxtel. I love that stuff. But I don't have Disney Plus, and I hear that The Mandalorian is really, really good. So what I'll probably do is I'll download it. I don't want to pay for it. I'll like get the free trial and just smash out the whole thing over a couple of days. I think that'd be really, really fun. But apart from doing things, the other thing that I wanted to sort of just have you reflect on is that I think at these times it can be really important to have routines. So how do you create a routine when you're at home? And I think most of us are creatures of routine, even if we don't think that we are. So you might want to break up your day, still stick with your, if you have food routines, say, your breakfast, morning tea, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, try and just keep a routine there. And then you might say, okay, well, mornings I'm going to do the chores in the house or do some decluttering or whatever it might be. And then afternoons I'm going to relax or, watch some movies or read a book or something like that. And so I feel like, yes, absolutely, finding proactively and creatively things to do is really important, but then giving yourself a little bit of routine, because for a lot of us, we feel quite uncomfortable without some structure. And for most of us, just being at home, there's very limited structure. We might really, really benefit if we are going to, from creating one. Speaking of being at home too, it's kind of got me thinking about stress and the emotions that we would feel. You go a bit stir crazy at the very least when you're home for that period of time, but you can also start to feel very isolated, and it can really cue mental health concerns like depression and anxiety, and there have been a lot of questions on emotional eating. And so I think the thing to really think about there is with emotional eating is to think about, we don't need food at that time. So we don't need nourishment at that time, at least not nutritional nourishment. We need emotional nourishment. So to be thinking about I don't need food here. This is not a food problem, but I need to deal with my emotions. And so, what does that mean for me? If it means I'm bored, I need to find something that occupies me, absorbs the brain, not just something to do, but something that really engages me. If I'm feeling disconnected, do I need to contact someone and connect with them? If I'm feeling a bit lethargic and depressed, do I need to move my body? All of, what is the emotion that I'm feeling here, and how can I service that emotion? Because it's about mood, it's not about food. If I'm feeling uncertain, for example, I don't know what's going on, I don't know, constantly getting new updates and things are constantly changing, maybe I need to sit down and make my plan and some contingency plans. Absolutely, of course, mental health is really, really important at this time. So making sure that if possible, even via telehealth, you're connecting with mental health professionals. But really, that's what I would ask myself. The question there is, if this is an emotional pull, an emotional eating craving rather than a physiological pull, a need that my body has, what is the emotion? Because I don't need food. The food is just a way for me, probably a relatively ineffective way a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time. It's a relatively ineffective way of me trying to service that feeling, or trying to get to meet my needs, or trying to deal with something that needs to be changed or resolved or fixed. So really thinking about, what do I actually need here? Now, in terms of health goals, because I know that we all have health and well-being goals, I think that the first thing is that we are probably going to need to review them. And this is exactly what I do with my clients. All my clients at this time, I'm saying, guys, you know what? We don't want to go to either extreme. We don't want to try and push ourselves to reach the goals that we set ourselves at the start of the year, because right now is not the time for that. And we are just going to run up against a lot of barriers if we ignore the reality that life has changed a great deal for almost all of us in some pretty profound ways. So we need to make room for that. On the other side, I don't think that we need to abandon our goals. We do need to, like I said, look at those things that you can do rather than the things that you can't do, and really do those things that you can, because your goals don't have to stop. So I think it's about finding that balance in the middle there somewhere. And the beautiful thing is, for you guys on the 12-month transformation, this is why we have a 12-month program. If we had a 12-week program or even a 6-month program, we would be totally stuffed. We would be like, throw it all out the window. But because we've got 12 months to focus on transforming our relationship with food and movement and our body image and our overall health, we have time. Of course, one great thing to think about is, which I always encourage you to do, is set non-health goals, non-weight goals, non-body goals. Could be a great opportunity to focus on those ones, because it might be a better time to focus on those ones. But if you do have movement and food related goals, a couple of quick thoughts that I have, just very, very practically, is that, and you already know this, we have to find a way to move our bodies. So if we're fortunate enough to be able to go outside, that's a fantastic option to be able to go out and get some vitamin D, go for a walk, great for the mental health, great to break the monotony of being inside all the time. Otherwise, it's obviously going to be a way to move inside. There's some great YouTube videos that you can follow. For example, there's some great yoga on YouTube. Louise Green, my wonderful colleague, and Louise and I did a great podcast. And maybe you could chuck up the podcast free trial of her fitness program just today because of this challenge. So she could be great to check out. And she's a wonderful, size-inclusive personal trainer. I would even go so far as to, if we decide that movement is so important and you might be stuck at home for a period of time, is to actually, if you feel like you need to, hire a treadmill or a stationary bike, or even buy one, to make sure that you have the opportunity to move. But it is really about finding a way to move your body in a way that works for you, because I think we will have to, for mental and physical reasons, find a way to keep moving to best get through this. I do think with food, of course, we talk about creating not only the mindset for transformation, but also the environment for transformation. And I do think this is one of those times where the food environment is really important, because we're going to be, probably for most of us, spending a lot more time at home. So with all of the restrictions that are happening, and then with all of the the people doing the panic buying and the shelves not being stocked as well as we want, we have to make room for that, of course, but we have to be mindful to do the best we can to have as nutritious a food environment as possible, because that's really going to support us, because we're going to be so absorbed in the home environment. So that food environment needs to be as nutritious as we can make it, in terms of less high impulse, low nutrition foods and more nutritious foods, because we are sensitive to the environment. But also, as I say that, absolutely accepting that that is going to be an impossible task for any of us to do perfectly, given the difficulty that many of us are experiencing with sourcing the normal foods that we have. So, guys, it's an interesting one, because I was just that's kind of like pretty much what I wanted to say to you guys. And I've just seen your comments had just stopped where they started, and I was kind of thinking, okay, well, I'm talking to everyone, but no one's really talking back. But you are talking back, which is good news. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just have a look through and see if anyone has anything to add. I've pretty much, I suppose, given you some of the main ideas that I wanted to share in terms of how you might, even in this very, very difficult, very hard, very challenging time, still take an optimistic approach in terms of permanence, personalization, and pervasiveness. And by that, I mean understanding deeply that this is not a personal thing, that this is a temporary thing, and there are definitely serious and profound areas of our lives that this is touching, but also areas that it's not touching. And I think that will help with our proactivity in dealing with it, our mental health as we get through this. And then also, I just wanted to share some ideas on just dealing with being at home a lot and managing sometimes the difficulties with our emotions that might come with that, and also how that relates to healthy living. So what I'm going to do now is just have a look through the comments and just see if anyone has anything to add. And please, if you have any questions, now's a really, really good time for them. Okay, Carolyn says, I'm at work. We're closed to the public, but still working. We're actually doing more physical work now. It's funny, isn't it, how this is just affecting us all in very, very different ways. Yeah, Sue said, during this COVID-19 environment, I'm noticing a tendency to want comfort food for my meals at the moment, i.e., often less nutritional choices, and somehow I feel better. This is a really important point, because I've just finished telling you about how we can feel better in non-food ways if we really ask ourselves what we're feeling, what needs we have that we need to meet, and what we need to change. And I think that's absolutely true. But I also think that what we're really talking about is emotional eating. And for most of us, too much emotional eating feels bad emotionally. It actually doesn't make us feel much better if we do too much, especially. And of course, emotional eating is linked with health problems, and it is linked with weight gain. So it is one of those things that we want to transcend to a great degree. But, and here's the caveat, sometimes emotional eating is the strategy you need. Sometimes emotional eating is a really well-developed strategy that can save your butt. And so I think it's up to each of us to really decide, okay, what level of emotional eating do we really need to help us get through this? Knowing that too much is going to be a problem for our physical and our psychological well-being, but maybe for some of us, probably for a lot of us, some amount is going to be a good coping strategy. And I think that's really the same when we talk about any type of coping strategies, is that when we rely on them too much or they become our sole strategy, that's when they become a problem. But emotional eating as one of a way, one of a variety or a plethora of coping strategies that we have, I think that probably works for most of us, myself included. Margaret says, great summary of Seligman's model. Yep. Um, Thanks for saying that, Margaret, because I do feel like it might sound like a funny thing to talk about. Optimism at a time like this. But I thank you for being open to that, because I do see there's so much value. And like I said, I actually think that optimism is great when things are going fantastically. It's a lot harder, but so much more useful when things are not going well. And Margaret continues, so many opportunities for growth in all of us in this situation. We can do things differently personally, professionally, and socially. Love the fact that we've finally realized at work that so many face to face meetings are not vital. And Margaret, I agree with you. I think that I am a person who I've trained myself, and I think the credit here goes to Seligman's work to see the opportunity in every problem. And I do feel like we have some powerful opportunities here. I was talking to a friend who was, showing some of the pretty profound things we're seeing, for example, in the environment. You see those canals in Venice that are clear where previously they were just so polluted due to all the movement. I heard, I don't know whether this is true or not, that there are, blue skies or clear skies can be seen in China for the first time in a very, very long time in certain places. I do feel like sometimes in these situations, we have the ability to connect with other people in a way that is more meaningful than our usual day-to-day interactions. And I also feel like when crazy things happen like this, we do move into what psychologists call an ontological state. Now, probably the best way I can describe an ontological state is, and we get this when something really bad happens, or when our routines shift a great deal, or when we go on holidays, when things change up a lot in our lives, we go from a period of a state of living in our lives, so just doing the day-to-day routine, which is fairly unconscious for a lot of us, to a state where we're actually looking at our lives. So because we're not so involved in those day-to-day routines, we can take that step back and look at our lives. So I think if we use it well, and this is absolutely not to discount that this is a tragic situation for so many people, and not to diminish the heaviness or the reality of this really unprecedented problem. That's not what I'm meaning, but I think that if we choose to, we can absolutely derive something of value, and maybe that's something that is just unique to each of us by taking this opportunity, because things are so different and we are probably naturally going into this ontological state, to use that, or to guide that state, to make sure that we can use it in a positive way and create some positive change around it. I'm just going back to your comments, guys. Yeah, so Pamela and Tamara have had interesting, sort of, to me, related questions. Pamela says, I'm on board with optimism in this circumstance, but what strategies can we use when others are pessimistic? And Tamara said, maybe looking for the positive things the community are doing to help each other. Unfortunately, the media focuses so much on the negative. Um, so, a couple of thoughts there is that, and I feel like I'm almost at risk of doing, well, not I'm almost, I am at risk of doing this now when I'm talking about optimism, is ignoring the hardship and the difficulty and the real worries that people have. People are worried about losing their life, and depending on where you live and depending on who you are, you should be. So it doesn't get any bigger than this. So one thing that psychologists always say is that, even if 95% of what's going on is due to other people or situations, you got to focus on that 5% that is just you. And so I would, with other people's pessimism, I would see that as part of the picture and find an optimistic way to deal with others' pessimism rather than asking them not to be pessimistic, because people are absolutely going to go into pessimism at this time. And even, we do know, getting a bit further into optimism research, even optimists become more pessimistic during tough times. They tend to recover their optimism fairly quickly, depending on, of course, a number of factors. But even optimists become more pessimistic in tough times. So everyone is going to get a bit more pessimistic. And what I'm saying is we need to deal with that more optimistically. A couple of things on that. I think it's important that we find a balance with how much media we pay attention to and absolutely what media we pay attention to. Normally, I have, and everyone who knows me who's watching this will absolutely test this. Normally, I don't watch a whole lot of media at all because I think it's generally the news is just bad news. I don't like all the diet culture stuff that comes with it. And so I put myself on the only diet that I put myself on is a low information diet. And I don't let a lot of that information come into my bubble. But I think that probably we have a responsibility to stay aware at this time. So I think it becomes important for us to not get exposed to too much pessimism, but also be aware of the reality so we're not seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. So I think that one way to deal with the media and what we're getting coming in terms of information is to be really, really selective. And that can be a very, very difficult thing to do. I read an article yesterday that worried me. The headlines worried me, and it was from the ABC. So it's our national, broadcasting organization here. And it was a flashy headline that made me anxious. And then when I read the whole thing, it made me a little bit more calm. I've even had a friend who gave me some inside information about things that were going to happen today that never eventuated. And it made me really anxious. So we have to be really mindful of the sources of our information. I think it is important for us to stay aware for ourselves and others, but we need to be filtering out the unnecessarily pessimistic information. I'm going to go back to your comments, guys. Yeah, Anne-Marie said, sometimes I feel as though, as well as quarantining myself from COVID-19, I need to quarantine myself from pessimistic people. And I think that sometimes we do need to do that. I actually remember one of my mentors, Andrea First, she was a sports psychologist, first and only psychologist I've ever worked for. I worked for her just as I finished my degree, and her research was in optimism, one of the most optimistic people ever. And so I've sort of said to you, I think we need to make room for some pessimism in ourselves and other people as well. And I absolutely believe that. I think we do need to remind ourselves of that in this context. But I remember having a conversation with Andrea about someone who was being a bit of a drag in my life, and she was just such a bubbly, positive, upbeat person. Nothing was a problem. Even when we had problems, she was so proactive and positive about sorting them out. She was awesome. And she got really serious, and she said, "Glenn, You need to be mindful of people like that because they will suck the life out of you and they will bring you down. And it really was one of those moments where I thought just the way that she looked at me with that intensity and the seriousness from an optimism researcher and someone who really practiced what she preaches, that sometimes we do need to be mindful to sort of quarantine ourselves, they're good words, from people who are going to bring us down. And of course, that could be a full quarantine, or it could be like a partial quarantine. We're just kind of limiting our exposure. Fran said, optimistic, may get some decluttering done and be able to simplify my life by managing with less. See, there's a beautiful, there's opportunity here within the problem. And Barbara, another possible opportunity, said it's forced me to take things one day at a time, which is a change for me because I'm normally always trying to plan ahead. So that could be a good change for me, perhaps, like a forced learning, like an immersion at learning how to be in the present. Yeah, wonderful. Man, I love that. Certainly helped us to see what meetings could have been an email. So many cancelled meetings at work. There could be a lesson in that. You're going to go, actually, you know what? Half of these meetings, we've all done that in big organizations or even small ones in meetings going, we didn't need to have a meeting about this. Hopefully we can, after this is all said and done, because it will be all said and done at some stage, we can take the lessons that we've learned here. Jerry says, I agree. Some power walks, definitely easy and safe and pleasant for me. Good to get the kids out of the house. Absolutely. It's as much about moving your body and getting a bit of vitamin D as it is about just breaking the routine so you don't go stir crazy. And also, Jerry says, an opportunity to simplify life and realize how little we can survive on and what really matters to my family and my loved ones. Sue says, and I love this. Sue says, "Hey friend, I'm with you. I'm spending more time at home and paying myself to declutter, sort and tidy stuff I haven't gotten to for ages." And I think that's so I love that because it's such a wonderful, like funny little game you're playing with yourself. Um, but I also love that because we do have to find ways to motivate ourselves because we will all, and I'm sure today we've all come up with some good ideas, and we will need to find ways to turn those ideas into actions, into lasting transformation. So I love that way of just playing a little creative game with yourself. Fantastic. Tanya, you're so right. It's good practice. Tanya says it's good practice at sitting with the unknown and not being able to have answers. It's showing up in all areas of life. Being a manager at work is tough, not being able to give answers and sit with the staff's uncertainty too, not just my own. I mean, isn't that a wonderful skill? How often do we feel like we need a plan or we need an answer? So we grasp for what makes sense now. Whereas if we're able to just sit with uncertainty, that discomfort of uncertainty for a period of time, then we can maybe sometimes come up with better answers. Or we all do have uncertain periods in our lives. I mean, goodness, we all know that right now. It's for me, it's hard to think of a more uncertain period. And so this could offer us the opportunity to learn to sit with the uncertainty, and that could be a skill that we cultivate for other times in our life where it helps us to make space for the uncertainty in our lives. Margaret says, listen to a book while you're walking and social distancing while walking, of course. Anne-Marie said, we've formed a social network group sending emails with funny stories. I think that's true. I'm finding that probably with so many things now, I've had 3 speaking engagements now: Philex, the fitness convention, a DAA, 2-day workshop, and a masterclass. So really two events there, and a presentation on self-care I was doing to a big organization have all been cancelled. So I actually have a bit more time, and I'm thinking, this is funny, isn't it? Because it's not a good idea to see my friends, but I'm thinking that it may actually be a better time to connect with them because I just have a little bit more time. So we can call, we've got a little Facebook group where we're sending just silly things. So it's not impossible that this could aid in your social connection. Margaret, learn a musical instrument online via Zoom to employ the artists that are unable to do gigs. That's right; those guys are looking for work because their whole industry is really, been deeply affected at the moment. Grow things in the garden, lots of gardening, music jams with the kids, FaceTiming with family and friends overseas. Decluttering is a big one. Sorting out all of the photos. I think those of us who are, Wendy says, I think those of us who are introverts will find it easier. Absolutely. Even though I, as you guys know, can talk the house down. It surprises a lot of people to know that I am an introvert. So for me, this is probably a much, much easier path than most people. Jerry said she loved the post about doing a home retreat while in lockdown. For one day, schedule meditation, journaling, self-care. I absolutely love that. How many of us want to do some personal development, some psychological development, some spiritual development, but feel like we don't have the time? Clean up your computer files, get back to piano practice. M says declutter and organize all my computer files. Glenn knows what my desktop looks like. Whew. So practice more music, read, meditate. There's so much. Becky, enjoying uninterrupted work time at home, to take training classes and add to my skill set. I absolutely love that. Yep. I've got a few things on the go work-wise. I've got Em and I are working on some beautiful Instagram posts that share some of the best stories from the best messages from Thin Sanity, and just doing others beautiful quotes and Instagram and Facebook stories. And that will take a few days, but to be able to have a few days to do that without any distractions could be really, really nice. So I totally get that. Sally says, yes, The Mandalorian. Set a new routine with an intention. Absolutely. When your routines change, then it actually automatically creates mindfulness. So you're not as locked in the old routine, so it's easier for you to create new habits. Yeah, Anne-Marie says she's feeling a bit lost, so we'll structure the day at home. What a wonderful idea. Look, there's just so many wonderful, wonderful ideas here. Yeah, guys, this is just great. We're just getting ideas and ideas. Squats and star jumps while you're waiting for food to cook. Carolyn says yoga with Adrienne is meant to be excellent. And then Sally seconds that and said, I highly recommend yoga with Adrienne. Guys, maybe one of you guys could even put a post up of that link. Kara's with a really helpful perspective. Speaking of optimism, that Australia has resources enough to produce enough food for 75 million people. Our population is 25 million. It's a good reminder that we don't need to panic about food running out. Hashtag not in an apocalypse, because it sometimes can feel a bit like that. It's feeling a bit apocalyptic. If you go out on the street or go to the supermarket, it can feel like that. Yeah, Becky said, my husband and I are saving gas money by not commuting to work. Great time for a technology detox. Good call, Paula. Guys, this has just been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I'm really, really thankful that we took the time to talk about this huge issue. And in hindsight, it would have been really weird of us, wouldn't it, to not address this issue. So thank you so much for going there with me. I hope that some of the conversation on optimism has helped you. I hope that some of the ideas that I have for things that are working well for my clients in terms of being at home a lot and how that relates to managing your emotional health and emotional eating and your physical activity and your health and well-being goals has been useful. And I think that most of all, your sharing and your ideas, you're willing to go there with me and add to the discussion, has been absolutely fantastic. So I think we've all done a really, really great job. I just want to, send my best wishes to everyone wherever you are, and just remind you all to let's, take care of ourselves and be smart. Remember that true optimism is grounded in reality. So let's take great care of ourselves while we're looking at things from a positive perspective. And I think it's important too that we kind of take care of each other. This is a very tough time for all of us. So I think it's important that we stick together and we be the sort of people that we want to be for ourselves and the sort of people that we want to be for society. So thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe. My best wishes for your health and your well-being and your safety, and also your mental well-being and your continued progress with your health, well-being, and other goals in a way that is right for you guys. And someone's just asked where this webinar will be. I don't think we will put this one in the TMT course, but like I said at the start, we're going to turn this into a video and maybe even a podcast. I think this would make a good podcast. So we will actually put this on our YouTube channel, and we'll do that pretty soon. We'll do that by tomorrow or at the latest next day. So it'll be the same time frame, and we'll put up something in the group so you can sort of refresh and reconnect. And even if you think that this will be worthwhile for someone else to hear, we will you can share it with them and link them in, because I think we've had an awesome chat. Yeah, Andrew, we'll definitely put it on the Facebook page. We might do it as a big long Facebook video, or we'll probably do it as a YouTube video that then you can share from your Facebook, and we'll share it on Facebook so you know where it is. All right, guys, I think that's tons and tons for us. I think it's time for us all to, well, depending on where we are, for us Aussies, us early bird Aussies, I'll be going to bed in about an hour. And depending on what you're going to do, well, you might be close to your bedtime too. We're grateful to be still seeing clients. I've got an 8 a.m. person, so I need to do my self-care and make sure I get my 8 hours, which I need to be on top of things for all of my people. So thanks so much for being with us, guys. I think this has been a really, really great chat, and I think we've all done a great job, and I know we'll continue to do a great job to see ourselves through to the other side of this. Maybe even taking some wonderful lessons or mindsets or habits from this really, really tough experience. Thanks, guys, and good night.